Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me recognize my problems have been solved. Let me recognize my problems have been solved. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me recognize my problems have been solved. First, you have to recognize you have a problem, and then you recognize that you don't have a problem. It was a grievance, an illusion you were looking at, and right behind the grievance that was causing you all the discomfort is the miracle that it was concealing. That's why our practice of forgiveness is so valuable to us in this world. It's what delivers us from perception of hell to the realization of heaven as a present state. Well, I'm Miracle Willie, forgiveness teacher from the Ozarks, and we are ready for lesson 90, which is the last of our last 10 lessons have been review, our second review, here on Saturday, March the 30th of 2024. For this review, we will use these ideas, and we're reading from the Foundation for Inner Peace publication, A Course in Miracles. For this review, we will use these ideas. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me realize today that the problem is always some form of grievance that I would cherish. Got our values mixed up. We got an upside down perception. Let me realize today the problem is always some form of grievance that I would cherish. Let me also understand that the solution is always a miracle with which I let the grievance be replaced. Today I would remember the simplicity of salvation by reinforcing the lesson that there is one problem and one solution. The problem is a grievance. The solution is a miracle. And of course, there's a step between those. That step between them from grievance to miracle is take time to ask for help and apply forgiveness. Ask God for help in seeing what is not there, and let it have no effect on you because you realize it is not there. It was just an imagination. The problem is a grievance. The solution is a miracle. And invite the solution to come to me through my forgiveness of the grievance and my welcome of the miracle that takes its place. Specific applications of this idea might be in these forms. This presents a problem to me which I would have resolved. Or, if you're tempted to cherish a grievance, you might say, the miracle behind this grievance will resolve it for me. Or you could say, the answer to this problem is the miracle that it conceals. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. And those three examples that he gave that you could use, those are just some examples. Don't feel like you have to use those words. I mean, if they help, well, by all means, use them. But you let yourself kind of find the right words, the right prayer, the prayer of your heart that says, let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. And then our lesson 80 review, that was lesson 79. Lesson 80 review is, let me recognize my problems have been solved. I seem to have problems only because I'm misusing time. I believe that the problem comes first and time must elapse before it can be worked out. I do not see the problem and the answer as simultaneous in their occurrence. That is because I do not yet realize that God has placed the answer together with the problem, so that they cannot be separated by time. The Holy Spirit will teach me this if I will let Him, and I will understand it is impossible that I could have a problem which has not been solved already. Wow, it's impossible that I could have a problem that has not been solved already. Such is the nature of God's care. These forms of the idea will be useful for specific application. So our basic overriding idea is, let me recognize my problems have been solved. And then here's some examples on how you could apply that, perhaps, when you're feeling like you do have a problem. You're upholding something that's a grievance, and you cherish in it. And so now we want to let it go. And here's some things you could say. I need not wait for this to be resolved. I need not wait. It's already resolved. The answer to this problem is already given me if I will accept it. Boy, now that one's really particularly meaningful to me. The answer to this problem is already given me if I will accept it. And the last example he gives is, time cannot separate this problem from its solution. Okay, well, let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me recognize my problems have been solved. Okay, let's go look in our text reading. We're in chapter 11, God or the Ego, and we are ready for From Darkness to Light here on March the 30th. And before we actually read that, let's talk just a moment about what all's going on around the world. It's out of holidays and observances. I find that it's Brother and Sisters Day. So nice day to greet your brother or your sister with either an actual verbal message or a letter, or just to give appreciation for your brother and sister. Earth Hour. And that's actually from 8:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. You're supposed to turn off all technological devices and just kind of, find your native state. I mean, it's probably a nice thing. And the idea is that if everyone does that between 8:30 and 9:30, well, the whole world will have a 24-hour period. Each of those hours will be a period where we're supporting nature. We're kind of tuning in with the ecological health of our planet. That was actually started by the World Wildlife Fund, who, the World Wildlife Fund doesn't use technology so much, do they? I'm talking about the wildlife, not the organization. Grass is always browner on the other side of the fence day. Basically, that is, the negative of the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Things could always be worse than they are, is the idea. So let's be thankful for where we're at. Holy Saturday, the day between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Holy Saturday. Ramadan continues. International Folding Laundry Day. National Doctors Day. National I Am in Control Day. And you are as a son of God. The question is, are you going to follow the guide that God has given you, or are you going to follow your imaginary guide called the ego? One will make you happy, and one will just get you into all kinds of discomfort. Pencil Day. Take a Walk in the Park Day. Torrance Day. I probably ought to have a VPN if you're going to work with torrents. I don't know a whole lot about it myself. But Turkey Neck Soup Day. Virtual Vacation Day. Take a journey using Google Earth and all the other technological advances of our day and go do some exploring in the world. World Bipolar Day. And then out of edible landscaping, we have the Wineberry raspberry. Wineberry raspberry, which is the Rubus phonocolossus. And it says in the edible landscaping that the Wineberry raspberry, originally from Japan, wineberries have naturalized here in the East. A summertime treat, fruiting after the spring raspberry and before the fall ones. Very acclimated. Will fruit in the shade. So there's a nice thing to consider for you permaculture gardeners that want to do a food forest. Always looking for foods that'll fruit in less than full light. So this might be one. Your Wineberry raspberry will fruit in the shade. High flavor, excellent flesh. Zone 6 through 8, space 6-foot circles, height 5 foot and arching, produces on 2-year wood. So remember that when you're trimming. And then out of Permaculture for Beginners by Carrie Mitchell, we're in Chapter 5, Plant Placement. We're ready for the section called Integration. And I'm just going to read this paragraph. Having reached the stage that the plot is divided into zones, and sectors have been identified according to the way nature works on them, the next level of the planning process is to examine whether the layout of systems and elements could be altered slightly to improve the way they interact with one another. This is the analysis of integration, and is essentially where you begin considering those finer details we've talked about. Creating an abundance of beneficial relationships between elements and sectors will give your site greater longevity and resilience, and minimize the amount of interference you have to exert to maintain it. Look to create as many connections as possible throughout your garden with the following techniques. And then we'll have a paragraph on each of these new techniques. Energy cycling technique, guilds, plants that are growing together, edge effect, and biological control. And then I had a video I listened to that I wanted to encourage y'all to consider watching. It's called 10 Crops to Feed Your Family in Hard Times. Self-sufficient. And Brian of Next Level Homestead, or Next Level Gardening, says that there's 10 foods that he would recommend everybody growing for that are high in either high in nutrients or high in calories. And those are kale, cabbage, corn, carrots, pumpkins, summer squash, potatoes, quinoa, sweet potatoes, and pole beans, pinto pole beans. And then also have a little herb garden. Most herbs are perennials. And then he said in that of those plants, you can also grow onions, lettuce, radishes, and I added tomatoes. But just those are some things I would encourage you to, and he's got a lot of videos that I think that people that are trying to learn how to grow our own food for either our health or for our own sustenance, or both, or just because it's fun. From darkness to light is what we're going to read. Oh, and our word for peace is out of the Abenaki Indians of the northeastern woodlands in North America, Canada, and the United States. And their word is Okikiamgenoka. 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 Okay, now let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. And let me recognize where problems have been solved. Now in chapter 11, God or the ego, from darkness to light. When you are weary, remember you have hurt yourself. Your comforter will rest you, but you cannot. You do not know how, for if you did, you could never have grown weary. Unless you hurt yourself, you could never suffer in any way, for that is not God's will for His Son. Pain is not of Him, for He knows no attack, and His peace surrounds you silently. And His peace surrounds you silently. God is very quiet, for there is no conflict in Him. Conflict is the root of all evil, for being blind it does not see whom it attacks, yet it always attacks the Son of God, and the Son of God is you and me and all of us. Paragraph 2, God's Son is indeed in need of comfort, for he knows not what he does, believing his will is not his own. The kingdom is his, and yet he wanders homeless. At home in God he is lonely, and amid all his brothers he is friendless. Would God let this be real, when he did not will to be alone himself? And if your will is his, it cannot be true of you, because it is not true of him. 3. O my child, if you knew what God wills for you, your joy would be complete. And what he wills has happened, for it was always true. When the light comes and you have said, God's will is mine, when the light comes and you have said, God's will is mine, you will see such beauty that you will know it is not of you. Out of your joy, you will create beauty in his name, for your joy could no more be contained than his. The bleak little world will vanish into nothingness, and your heart will be so filled with joy that it will leap into heaven and into the presence of God. I cannot tell you what this will be like, for your heart is not ready. Yet I can tell you and remind you often that what God wills for himself, he wills for you. And what he wills for you is yours. It's like we have this great inheritance and we don't realize it. So it's not useful to us because we don't realize that we have this incredible riches. Paragraph 4. The way is not hard, but it is very different. Yours is the way of pain, of which God knows nothing. That way is hard indeed, and very lonely. Fear and grief are your guests, and they go with you and abide with you on the way. But the dark journey is not the way of God's Son. Walk in light and do not see the dark companions, for they are not fit companions for the Son of God, who was created of light and in light. The great light always surrounds you and shines out from you. How can you see the dark companions in a light such as this? If you see them, it is only because you're denying the light. But deny them instead, for the light is here, and the way is clear. The illusory companions, he calls them the dark companions, the illusions. Paragraph 5. God hides nothing from his Son, even though his Son would hide himself. Yet the Son of God cannot hide his glory, for God wills him to be glorious and gave him the light that shines in him. You will never lose your way, for God leads you. When you wander, you but undertake a journey that is not real. The dark companions, the dark way, are all illusions. Turn toward the light, for the little spark in you is part of a light so great that it can sweep you out of all darkness forever. For your Father is your Creator, and you are like him. 6. The children of light cannot abide in darkness, for darkness is not in them. Do not be deceived by the dark comforters, and never let them enter the mind of God's Son, for they have no place in his temple. When you are tempted to deny him, remember that there are no other gods to place before him, and accept his will for you in peace, for you cannot accept it otherwise. Accept God's will for you in peace. You can't accept it any other way except in peace. Paragraph 7. Only God's comforter can comfort you. In the quiet of his temple, he waits to give you the peace that is yours. Give his peace, that you may enter the temple and find it waiting for you. Give his peace. Give his peace, that you may enter the temple and find it waiting for you. Can't outgive God. Give peace to all your brothers and sisters and find out that God's given you peace. The only thing that kept you from knowing about it is that you're withholding of the peace that you had for your brothers. But be holy in the presence of God, or you will not know that you are there. For what is unlike God cannot enter his mind, because it was not his thought and therefore does not belong to him. And your mind must be as pure as his, if you would know what belongs to you. Guard carefully his temple. Another way I like to think of that, guard carefully his temple, is be vigilant for God and his kingdom. So guard carefully his temple, for he himself dwells there and abides in peace. You cannot enter God's presence with the dark companions beside you, but you also cannot enter alone. All your brothers must enter with you, for until you have accepted them, you cannot enter. So by practicing our lesson today, we realize that we're to see that we don't have any problems. All those dark companions, those friends or those people that were walking along with us that we tend to want to avoid or attack to protect ourselves, those are the dark companions that have to be changed to our dear brothers that are walking into heaven with us. So let me read it again. Let me back up paragraph or a little bit in the middle of the paragraph. For what is unlike God cannot enter his mind, because it was not his thought and therefore does not belong to him. And your mind must be as pure as his, if you would know what belongs to you. Guard carefully his temple, for he himself dwells there and abides in peace. You cannot enter God's presence with the dark companions beside you, but you also cannot enter alone. All your brothers must enter with you. All your brothers must enter with you. For until you have accepted them, you cannot enter. For you cannot understand wholeness unless you are whole, and no part of the Son can be excluded if he would know the wholeness of his Father. And the last paragraph for this section, 8. In your mind you can accept the whole sonship and bless it with the light your Father gave it. Then you will be worthy to dwell in the temple with him, because it is your will not to be alone. God blessed his Son forever. If you will bless him in time, you will be in eternity. Time cannot separate you from God if you use it on behalf of the eternal. We learned that the other day. See the eternal in each other, not the transient, not the beginning and the end. See that we're all eternal, and that our connection with each other is our godness. That's what brings us into the presence of the Holy One, is our realization that we can't get there alone. We have to be at peace with everyone. Okay, lesson 90. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me realize today that the problem is always some form of grievance that I would cherish. Let me also understand that the solution is always a miracle with which I let the grievance be replaced. Today I would remember the simplicity of salvation by reinforcing that there is one problem and one solution. The problem is a grievance. The solution is a miracle. And I invite the solution to come to me through my forgiveness of the grievance and my welcome of the miracle that takes its place. Specific applications of this idea might be in these forms. This presents a problem to me which I would have resolved. Or if you're tempted, you might say the miracle behind this grievance will resolve it for me. Or you might say the answer to this problem is the miracle that it conceals. And do that of the earlier part of the day, and then the latter part of the day, lesson 80, let me recognize my problems have been solved. I seem to have problems only because I'm misusing time. I believe that the problem comes first and time must elapse before it can be worked out. I do not see the problem and the answer as simultaneous in their occurrence. That is because I do not yet realize that God has placed the answer together with the problem so that they cannot be separated by time. So in the beginning, you may recognize you have a grievance, and then think that it may take a little time before you to get your mind straightened out. But you'll soon realize that the answer is in your mind right now and that you can use it to your own benefit and stay joyful. Let go of that grievance. Be glad you saw it and let her go. Okay, so he says, I do not see the problem, the answer as simultaneous in their occurrence. That is because I do not yet realize that God has placed the answer together with the problem, so that they cannot be separated by time. The Holy Spirit will teach me this if I will let Him, or if you'll ask Him for help, He'll bring you the help you need. And I will understand it is impossible that I could have a problem which has not been solved already. These forms of the idea will be useful for specific application. I need not wait for this to be resolved. Or you might say, when you're seeing yourself tempted, that believe the problem and the answer are separate, you could say the answer to this problem is already given me, if I will accept it. Or you might say, time cannot separate this problem from its solution. Time cannot separate this problem from its solution. Do your 2 longer 15-minute practice periods today. And then throughout the day, in the morning, tell yourself, let me get rid of it. In the morning, tell yourself, let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. And if you have a grievance, say, this presents a problem to me which I would have resolved. Or the miracle behind this grievance will resolve it for me. Or the answer to this problem is the miracle that it conceals. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved, be solved. Then in the afternoon, let me recognize my problems have been solved. Let me recognize my problems have been solved, been solved. And if you have a grievance, tell yourself, I need not wait for this to be resolved. I need not wait for this to be resolved. Just change your mind. The answer to this problem is already given me if I will accept it. Time cannot separate this problem from its solution. Let me recognize my problems have been resolved, been resolved. Let me recognize my problems have been solved. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved, be solved. And our word in Abenaki is Okikiamgenoka, for peace. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. Let me recognize my problems have been solved. Okikiamgenoka.